Vinnie Politan, thank you for joining us. Big hour ahead here on closing arguments. And let's start. You know, it didn't take long in this case. Shanda Vander Ark, within like a day of her trial, became historically one of the most notorious child killers in the history of this network. In all the cases, in all the years that we've covered here, it happened like that. She is that evil. And she was convicted of starving and torturing her special needs son with the help of one of her other children. Well, she has, and that other child, Paul Ferguson, he was also indicted, has pleaded guilty, will be sentenced next month. But today was Judgment Day for Shanda Vander Ark, which meant there were going to be victim impact statements. And sometimes in these family cases, it's kind of awkward. Sometimes there's no one there to speak for the victim when the killer is a parent. But in this case, Timothy's siblings, two of them, two of Shanda's other children, came in to speak. Powerful, powerful statements, giving us more insight into what happened here. Let's take a listen.
I'm Millie. I'm Timothy's youngest older sister. I'm 2 years older than him. One of my earliest memories I have was being taken away from my parents by CPS. My two older brothers rode in a car ahead of us, and me and Timothy rode together in the second car. And in every picture we have as a family, Timothy was always right by my side. We were the two youngest, the two smallest. We were the two that sat in the middle in the backseat car rides with the too small car. The last two to get hand-me-downs, the two that never had to worry about not getting homework help from an older sibling. He was always 2 years behind me, so every time I got to the next level in school, that's how many years I had to wait for him to follow along. I was his big sister. It was my job to protect him. I like to say I don't regret things in my life, that every mistake I've made has made me who I am today, but when Timothy died, I couldn't stop regretting. I regret not hugging him more and teasing him so much instead of telling him that I loved him every once in a while. I regret not putting aside my differences with Shanda and Paul just to check in on him. I regret not dancing with him the last time I saw him at our brother's wedding. These are the things that I can't remedy now. There's no fixing what's been done. No way to redo it all over again, and that's my regret. That I couldn't protect him when he needed me most. I'm here today for him, because I was asked to speak for him, because I was given a victim impact statement for him instead of a witness one, because the victim of this crime can't speak for himself. I knew him his whole life. I held him the day he was born, and I continued to try to hold his hand as long as he was by my side, until he wasn't. I want the woman who killed my little brother to face the highest punishment possible. I want her detained for the rest of her life so she can't hurt anyone else. And I want the world to know that Timothy was wanted, if not by her, then by me. He was loved by me.
Timothy wasn't surrounded by people who loved him when he died. And if I had known that, nothing could have stopped me from rescuing him and holding him in my arms and telling him I love him, that his big brothers got him, just like I did the day he was born. But because of Shanda Vander Ark's actions, I instead got to cradle the bag of his ashes in my arms, just like I did the day he was born. In all my life, I only knew one thing that my little brother didn't like. He hated goodbyes. If he had to say goodbye to anyone, he would cry, and he would hold you, and he would say, "Don't go." But now I'm the one crying, but I never got to say goodbye. I will always love Timothy like I always have, and it kills me to think about, but I know he loved even his abuser and killer up until the very end, because unlike me, that's all he was capable of, love. I, on the contrary, want to stand here and express the anger and hatred that I feel, but if I'm honest, all that's just a mask, a bandage I try to put over the hole in my heart that was reserved for Timothy, but is now just filled with pain and remorse for every hug, high five, and I loved you that I might have missed in the time that I had with my sweet baby brother. So now I turn to the justice system in hopes that in addition to serving the maximum penalty, that there will be no appeals or second chances. If I can't have my brother back, she shouldn't have her freedom back. And lastly, I want everyone to know that to those who knew him, even that wouldn't feel like justice. Because the life of one sweet little blue-eyed boy is not equivalent to that of a murderer.
She had stopped thinking of her children as human beings. And frankly, her not looking over and not even wanted to express some type of emotion or some type of remorse or some type of recognition of those two older children that she had a hand in raising and who spoke so eloquently and so beautifully and so passionately here today, just reflects what I guess we already feared and already knew about Ms. Vander Ark.
Something broke. If she said no, or if we wouldn't be here, something broke. Judge, this case makes no sense to anybody. There's no specific intent here. There's no intention. Her intention was to mother her kids like she did the other two children that were in her home household. That was her intention. Her intention was to provide, as she did with the other two kids. You don't see this with the other children. This is just something about this boy and this woman broke. 30 years ago, we didn't know about postpartum depression. 20 years ago, we didn't know about postpartum psychosis. Someday, somebody's going to tell us what's wrong with this woman and why anyone would be capable of what she did. Someone's going to explain it. 400 years ago, we burned people like her at the stake because the bloodlust was there.
To see what you did to your own child. I don't know if there's a word in the English language to describe how to describe it. I only can come up with just horrific. You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. And let's call it what it is. It's torture. You tortured this child. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't trying to curb his behavior. You tortured him. You monitored him obsessively. All the things you did. I looked through every one of the messages. Bread with hot sauce, wall sits, up and down the stairs, sleep deprivation, ice baths, making him puke up food, monitoring his bathroom time, giving him 60 seconds in the bathroom if he went to urinated, or 5 minutes if he had a bowel movement. You made him sleep in the closet. You threatened to make him sleep in the garage. You put Tabasco directly in his mouth. You made him put his hands over the head. Made him work in the garage with no pants. And there's two other things that didn't come out in the trial that were in the messages. One, that there was talk of blindfolding him, depriving him of his physical sight as a punishment. And the last thing that struck me is just absolutely horrific in terms of your thinking. There was mentioning of giving him salt water as a punishment. One of the text messages talks about, hey, tell Paul or tell Tim that I'm not going to do the saltwater punishment. And your reasoning for not punishing him was that, oh my God, we can't get him salt water. That could hurt him, that could kill him. But it was because you didn't want to give him another excuse to sit down on the toilet because he'd have diarrhea. He'd have diarrhea, and so he would have an excuse to sit down for a few more minutes while he was diarrhea from salt water. That was your excuse. I don't know how to right this wrong. We try to do that. I try to do that from the bench every day. There's no way to right this wrong except impose a sentence that essentially takes away your freedom. It's a sentence of the court. First as to count 2, child abuse in the first degree. Court sentences you 50 years to 100 years in prison. Credit for 575 days. Court is exceeding guidelines in this case. The court finds that the amount of torture that I've indicated in terms of the long-term suffering that Mr. Ferguson Timothy went through justifies on a reasonable grounds to depart from the guidelines. Used to be the standard was the guidelines. If the guidelines didn't take into consideration all the elements, I don't think they would take into consideration the amount of absolute systematic, consistent torture that you engaged in here. I think that's enough reasons to justify departing from the guidelines. There's a $68 state cost, $130 crime victim rights assessment. As to count 1, felony murder. It's a sentence of the court that you serve a term within the Michigan Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life without parole.
The details described by the judge. You try to think about these killers and you try to get in their minds, and in some of the cases, all right, it's jealousy, it's greed, it's lust, it's money. This is just straight up cruelty. Cruelty. Let's bring in our think tank. Joining us tonight in Cleveland, Ohio, retired judge, former prosecutor, judicial fellow at the National Judicial College, Judge Gail Byers is with us. Also joining us in Seattle, Washington, trial attorney, fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, Ann Bremner, and in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney, former federal prosecutor, law professor at Texas Southern University, Michael Sterling. Great to see everyone tonight. It didn't take long, Judge. Like within a day, people got it. You know, who she was and what she did. She's convicted, judgment day today. She doesn't speak. Here's the thing I want to ask you about, though. Somehow in her life, she was able to go to law school, graduate, and get a job as a judicial law clerk. How scary is that? How scary is that?
Well, I suppose it could be, Vinny, as scary as some individuals who choose to represent themselves when they're facing murder charges. So, you know, we have a lot of folks that walk through the doors of law schools. We have a lot of folks who learn their law from very intelligent and brilliant folks like you, and they take their chances and they look what happens. And look who we have here, somebody who's very adept in the law, but equally depraved, absolutely depraved.
Depravity is a great descriptive word here, Ann Bremner, when we talk about this woman. You know, that we cover so many trials. Sometimes some of the defendants we lose track of. They escape our memory a little bit. This one won't. I think every viewer, I think everyone who watched this trial, which wasn't a long trial, this one is going to stick in your mind because of the level of depravity on her own child, who, as his siblings were saying, hated to say goodbye. He hated to say goodbye because when someone would leave, he knew that he was then going to get stuck with mom.
Yeah, and they were so eloquent. I mean, just beautifully stated in what's such a tragic case. She is just evil personified, excuse me. I mean, I'm just kind of dumbfounded by this case. I think everybody is. She is pure evil. There's no other way to describe her, and she's smart to boot. I think the judge talked about the fact that he thought a lot about this case, trying to figure out what her motives were and trying to understand her, because it's just perplexing that she could be that truly evil, especially to her own child.
Now, her other child, Paul Ferguson, testified. He pleaded guilty. Didn't get a deal per se. Let's take a look at a little bit of his testimony.
Do you remember telling Detective Peiske, if I could take his place right now, if I could give him his life back, I'd do it. I'd do it in a dadgum heartbeat. Do you remember saying that?
I stand by it.
Yes, sir. You never intended your brother to die, did you?
No.
Let me ask you, Michael Sterling, we saw what the judge did here with the mother. Is it going to be a different story when Paul Ferguson next month comes into the courtroom and is sentenced?
I think so, Vinny. I don't think it'll be the same level of punishment. I think judges will take into consideration the fact that he didn't have a plea deal, that he testified without a plea deal, that he's accepted responsibility for his actions, that he didn't go to trial, but accepted just pled guilty and took responsibility for his actions. And as Judge Gail Byers knows well, that is something that's very important for judges. They take that into consideration, and so I think you'll see, the judge consider those factors as mitigating punishment, consider the fact he's accepted that responsibility, and we'll probably see, I think he will still be sentenced fairly and harshly, but it probably won't be to the same extent as his mother.
And obviously we will continue to follow that story because that one is happening next month. Our think tank is with us the whole hour, folks. Up next.
A wild case in Key West as an accused murderer represents himself in the Treehouse murder case. Today, the defendant takes the stand in his own defense after talking to Court TV. We have the big moments.
Did a contentious divorce lead to a killing?
Jennifer Dulos vanished in 2019 and has never been found.
Her estranged husband was charged with her murder, but died by suicide before going to trial.
Now his girlfriend, Michelle Traconis,
Stands trial for her alleged role in the disappearance.
I think this is going to be a really fascinating case. They've thrown everything up against this defendant.
The Missing Mom Conspiracy Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, only on Court TV.
Force me to go to close. I mean, again, it's a mistrial.
Excuse me, sir?
It would be a mistrial, Your Honor. You're not allowing me to provide a defense.
Sir, you can state and twist and spin whatever you'd like to.
Somebody giving Paula Belmont Xanax right before she goes to testify is a problem. You know what I'm saying? But, the judge doesn't care about that. That's my problem. That was my bad lawyering skills. To have the prosecution be able to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's not the standard for a motion for judgment of acquittal.
All the evidence the state presented, they still haven't even come up with a concrete narrative. To think that the jury is going to be able to come anywhere close to a verdict of beyond reasonable doubt, I don't see it. Bottom line is they don't have a case. They never did. 6 years, and this is the best they got. They got Travis Johnson collecting all day.
There he is, Ty Tucker. He was offered a deal. Time served. Could have just walked home, enjoyed the rest of his life with his wife, who was the co-founder of CrossFit, who has millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, but instead decided to represent himself and defend himself in a case where he says he's innocent of the murder charges. He took the stand in his own defense today. There he is. Still has those glasses on his head. Interesting. All right, let's go right down to Key West. Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson joining us from the warm tropical airs of Key West tonight. All right, Matt, he took the stand. He's representing himself. What was it like today?
Vinny, good evening. So the jury was leaning in and they put down their notebooks as soon as the judge said that, yes, he's going to take the stand in his own defense. He walks up there and he begins his narrative, and he was really focusing on his arrest. Much of the time that he was on the stand and giving his own account of events was focusing on being arrested and what it was like after being arrested. Only one time he really talked about visiting the treehouse. He said 3 times. He talked about meeting Matthew Bonnet, the victim in all of this. And then under cross-examination, he really got to talk about what he's been saying outside of court. He mentioned the fact that he feels he's being framed. Take a listen to both of these.
Because somebody else asked me this not too long ago, and they asked me if I had ever been to the treehouse before, right? And yes, I've been to the treehouse 3 times in my life. Matt was actually a nice guy. You know, that's the only time I've ever met him, and he was a nice guy. He was, that's about all. I mean, like I said, I didn't get to know him or anything like that. But, he showed me around, showed me what he had, and I just said no. That's all it was.
Do you know how many times Mr. Bonner was stabbed?
At this point, yes.
So now, I guess your story is that this is all being pinned on you, right? That you didn't do this.
You would know better than anybody, Mr. Mansfield.
So, in other words, this is your theory, that this is all being pinned on you by the Big Bubba system.
Your Honor, I would object unless he wants to let me go into the things he doesn't want to go into.
I'll sustain that last question as argumentative.
A lot of sidebars that these jurors were taking note of, and a lot of times that there were objections from the prosecutors in all of this. And Vinny, I was noticing very closely with a couple jurors in particular on the second row, and they were almost appeared like they were watching a pickleball event, because they were just kind of going back and forth, looking at these two sparring.
What's interesting, I mean, this is just fascinating to watch because of the whole, all the circumstances here. He's got access to millions of dollars, could get the best legal representation in Florida, chose not to. Could have taken time served and just walked home, decided not to. And now he takes the stand. And before he took the stand, he was talking to you?
Yeah, he was talking to me, and I was asking him, why are you being your own lawyer, pro se, when you have millions of dollars in the bank? You're married to the co-executive founder of CrossFit. You can afford an attorney. And he said, well, I do have attorneys that I'm consulting with, and it wouldn't be any different of an outcome, I believe, in the very end. But here's more of our conversation. Talk to me about the decision to take the stand, and are you prepared for this?
Actually, you know, we were just discussing. I've told my story a million times, and yeah, I have no problem with taking the stand. You know, I figured my closing was going to tell my story more than anything else.
How have you been preparing since you're a pro se defendant? You're your own lawyer.
Well, I mean, the thing is okay, originally I didn't plan on taking the stand because I didn't feel I would have to. I figured the jury's going to hear from me the entire time, so it doesn't, you know, again, any questions that they have are probably going to be answered by what I'm putting up.
Are you prepared to go to prison if they find you guilty?
I don't know if anybody could be prepared to go to prison, but you know, if they find me guilty, I mean, look, I knew the consequences of what could happen here. You know, I've accepted the consequences of what could happen here. The thing is I don't see how they find me guilty beyond a reasonable doubt because, again, they have no evidence. They presented an entire case, and they put on a whole bunch of cops who not one says anything about me. The only person who ever says anything about me is Travis.
All right, so that was before he took the stand. After he took the stand, I also spoke with him as he was leaving the courthouse. He says that he feels very confident about tomorrow, and he's ready for closing arguments and for that jury to make their decision.
Yep, that's all coming up tomorrow. Matt Johnson in Key West tonight. Thank you, sir.
Of course.
All right, let's bring back in our think tank, Judge Gail Byers, Ann Bremner, Michael Sterling. Well, guys, what do you think? What do you think, Ann?
I think he's really good. I mean, I think he could have his own show. I mean, there's something really likable about the guy. And the fact that he's doing this with all the money in the bank and everything else, I mean, I think he can pull it off. That's just me. He just seems to be somebody that's persuasive, and he's very authentic. And we always say to lawyers, be your authentic self in court, right? Well, he's definitely his authentic self, and I think it's working.
Michael Sterling, I've never seen anyone so calm. I don't get it.
You see, he hasn't, that's how I know he's pro se. That's how I know he doesn't do this for a living. Because anytime I hear someone say, there's no way they can find me guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, I know you haven't been doing this job. Because when you do this job, and when you're as calm and collected, as calm and as cool and as easygoing as he is, you don't understand the consequences as much as you think you do. Because I can't tell you, Vinnie, how much I shake, how nervous I am, how I get butterflies in my stomach, even when it's not me whose life is at risk, but knowing the consequences, especially in a case involving armed robbery and murder, where there's the possibility of spending the rest of your natural life in prison. I don't think he really grasps the consequences, even though he says he does, but in his mind, he is convinced there's no way the jury can find me guilty, which is how I know he does not do this for a living, because jurors are strange creatures.
And judges just love it when a defendant represents himself, because then you get the lawyers out of the way and you can just cut to the chase.
I'm like, do we, Vinnie?
No.
Absolutely. Actually, is the very opposite. I think this gentleman sees this in part as theater, and he's kind of treating the courtroom in a sense like it is a theatrical performance, because there is no attorney anywhere that would do anything short of sit on their client and duct tape their mouths before they would allow them to give the plethora of interviews this gentleman has given throughout the life of this trial, thereby providing even more ammunition to the prosecution.
Well, does the equation change if someone is innocent? I don't know if he's innocent or guilty. I have no idea. I wasn't there. But if someone's innocent, what's the big deal if they talk?
he clearly, and so to Mr. Sterling's point, he clearly in his mind believes not only that he's innocent, but that he can convince this jury that he is. And quite frankly, he really only needs to convince one holdout, right? Let's just be honest about this. If he can get one person to hold out, then he's really on his way. The fact of the matter is, however, is that jurors are very strange creatures. They often engage in groupthink. And insofar as you may get one person who wants to be a holdout, all it takes is the other ones to gang up on them in a little bit of time, and you will have a verdict. I can commit that to you. And I know for all the trials you've had, Vinnie, that no matter how much evidence you have as a prosecutor, you are always nail biting until that verdict is actually announced, because things can turn on a dime and you never know what those jurors are thinking. And this gentleman clearly doesn't get that equation.
Yeah, and I know that perspective now. Last week, I served on a jury. I was on the jury. I was in the box. And it's a whole different perspective. But the one thing that you want as a juror is you do want a sense of justice in the case. And there are emotional connections sometimes that we, and I'm talking about jurors, that we make with witnesses, plaintiff, defendant. It was a civil case. But I think this is going to be a tough one for this jury. I think it's going to be a tough one, but we'll see. It was a little messy. A little messy. Sometimes justice is. We shall see. Tomorrow's a big day. Yes.
I caution the cavalierness, though. I would caution the cavalierness.
Yeah. Oh, that's a problem. That's a problem. They don't like that. We don't like that. When I say they, I mean we, because I'm a juror now. All right. Stay where you are, everyone. Up next.
More powerful evidence in Connecticut. The jury shown bloody photos as the trial of Michelle Troconis continues, with prosecutors trying to prove that Troconis took part in the murder of her dead boyfriend's missing wife.
Mother of a convicted school shooter now faces charges herself.
Involuntary manslaughter and 4 counts of it.
Both James and Jennifer Crumbly failed to ask their son if he had his gun.
This is beyond neglect. It's unforgivable.
The first parents in America to be charged in a mass school shooting. This is brand new territory.
The school shooter mom trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
All of the exhibits that you examine, all of the laboratory work that you did with regard to what was taken from the home in New Canaan, all of the, whatever findings you made, either there was an inconclusive result or it eliminated Michelle Troconis's DNA from being a contributor. Isn't that right?
Yes, I do not recall having a positive association.
All right, so no DNA at the home connecting Michelle Troconis to the crime scene, to the murder of her dead boyfriend's missing wife. Her dead boyfriend is Fotis Dulos. If he hadn't taken his own life, he'd be on trial for this murder. But Michelle Troconis is now charged in being part of that conspiracy. The jury has seen some video of Michelle Troconis along with Fotis driving around Stamford, Connecticut, and throwing away evidence. Now, Fotis is really the one doing it for the most part. She admittedly is in the car with him when he is doing this. Is there going to be enough evidence in this case? Well, Kelly Craft, Court TV legal correspondent, is in Connecticut and takes a look at the state's case so far.
Well, good evening, Vinnie. Prosecutors spent the day tearing open bags of evidence in this case and slowly pulling out items of evidentiary value to establish that Jennifer Dulos, the missing mother of 5 whose body has never been recovered, was the victim of a bloody crime. Let's listen to a sergeant from the Connecticut State Police Department talking about one of the items recovered.
If I may, sir, can you please point to where the shirt is cut?
It's almost right down the center of the shirt.
Are there any buttons or zippers on the shirt?
No.
So, and what is the brand?
It's a Vineyard Vine shirt.
And over here, there's some marking. What is that?
there's a defect in the shirt.
Are you talking about the hole?
Yeah,
Okay. And did this go to the lab?
it did.
That bloody Vineyard Vines shirt, a blood-soaked bra, zip ties, black gloves, a white towel with blood, also ponchos, and some clear plastic soaked in what appears to be blood. These items recovered by investigators in various trash bins across Hartford, Connecticut. Investigators sifted through mounds of garbage and found several items of evidentiary value in the bins and inside black trash bags. They say that this contained DNA of Jennifer Dulos. Defense counsel for Michelle Troconis had this to say after the state's presentation of the evidence.
All of the exhibits that you examine, all of the laboratory work that you did with regard to what was taken from the home in New Canaan, all of the, whatever findings you made, either there was an inconclusive result or it eliminated Michelle Troconis's DNA from being a contributor. Isn't that right?
Yes, I do not recall having a positive association.
And Vinnie, I also want to talk about the investigation in this case. The state has put on several law enforcement officials talking about the investigation and how they had to sift through mounds of evidence, mounds of garbage. Let's take a look at some of that garbage that they had to sift through that was collected throughout the city of Hartford, Connecticut. And you can really see how they had to go through several items and recover pieces of evidentiary value in this case. Let's hear from a defense counsel who talks about the fact that Vinnie Dulos was up to something, but his client had no idea what that something was.
Michelle told the police multiple times that she was either talking to her family members, her daughter at one point, her mother, and she looks up, she says, "What are we doing here?" They were supposed to be going to Starbucks.
And Vinnie, before this case was getting underway, there was some chatter that these images of Vinnie Dulos throwing trash out in various bins across Hartford, that maybe he was throwing away construction materials that he didn't want to pay for. But when taking a look at the state's presentation of the evidence today in this case, seeing them tear open bag after bag and seeing those items that were so important, and then also seeing that surveillance video of Vinnie Dulos in that black Ford Raptor pulling up to various trash bins across the city of Hartford and getting out and throwing away various items, it's really hard to say that that was construction material, especially after what we saw today. But we did ask defense counsel again about all of this evidence, and here's what he had to say about his client.
Nothing that was in those bags will be shown to have had anything to do with Michelle Troconis or that she knew what was in any of those bags.
And Vinnie, also another piece of evidence discussed today, retrieved from one of those trash bins, a box cutter. That's the latest from here in Stamford, Connecticut. Kelly Craft will send it back to you.
Kelly Craft in Connecticut. Trial continues on Wednesday, Connecticut versus Michelle Troconis, but most of the evidence, a large majority of the evidence, is connected to her dead boyfriend, Vinnie Dulos. Let's bring back another think tank. Judge Gail Byers, Ann Bremner, Michael Sterling. Michael, this is a case where Vinnie Dulos, tons of evidence against him. She's the girlfriend. What does she know? What role did she play? What are your thoughts about what a jury wants to hear in this case against Troconis?
Yeah, Vinnie. Well, let me tell you, my thoughts were I was frustrated watching that question from defense counsel on cross-examination as a trial simulation professor. He needed to break that question down into about 30 questions because what he had was, and what I think the jury wants to hear to answer you, is they want to hear whether there's concrete evidence that ties her to this crime, and not this sort of speculation that she knew what her boyfriend was doing, if there any concrete evidence. And he was making a good point But what he really should have done was pointed out how many pieces of evidence were pulled from the victim's home, from Jennifer Dulos' home, how many things they looked at, how many things they examined, how they conducted that scientific testing, how it was done. And then he would have been able to end with the big point that in all of that they did, none of that showed anything related to Michelle Troconis and her DNA, because that's what the jury wants to hear. Can you connect her in any physical way to any of these things? And he had a good point to make, and he just kind of blew it with this confounding question on cross-examination.
Judge, this is a difficult one for prosecutors. You were also a prosecutor. How do you connect her enough that this jury is comfortable that, oh yeah, she was in on it?
Oh, the prosecution's absolutely going to need to respond to every single hole the defense has just poked into their story. They're going to have to bring forth evidence that demonstrates that she was aware that the victim is deceased and that she was murdered, that she actually knew what her boyfriend was doing, that perhaps she was aware of these several bags in the vehicle, and that these several stops along the way were designed specifically to hide or to fail to disclose where these several items are. I agree that the defense was doing a great job in trying to create the point. But here's what I'll tell you, is the press conference was probably better than the actual examination that the attorney did of the witness, because he did a better job explaining it during the press conference than he did with the witness that was on the stand. And so he's making the prosecution's job difficult, and he should, because it's a hard case. But he's also not doing the best job possible of bringing the big picture together for the jury, who's ultimately going to decide. The prosecution has an uphill battle. And quite frankly, Vinnie, if you'll remember, this is the case where I think even the suicide note says that my girlfriend had nothing to do with the murder of my wife, or the death of my wife. And so that's another
sort
piece
of. It was a little bit of a self-serving note that he wrote.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if the prosecution does not pounce on this and seize that opportunity to show how self-serving it was in addition to the other evidence, they are going to lose this case. And unfortunately for the victim, there will be no justice.
And Bremner, you think she's going to tell her story, or just kind of sit back and say they didn't prove it?
Well, I think the latter. I mean, if she listens to her lawyer. Although one thing I was thinking on this, Vinnie, is when's the last time you rode in a car with someone and they were just throwing things out of the car? Like he was.
And it's not just anyone. It's not like he can't afford, to have a garbage pickup, right? I mean, the guy's a millionaire. I mean,
right? Like what was that?
He
right?
should have people for this. Like people for this. Like, oh yeah, that's my garbage person. This is the person that throws my garbage out. Like I don't even handle it. It makes no sense at all, except if he's getting rid of evidence that they are now bringing into court. It'll be interesting. We'll obviously keep an eye on it, folks, right here on your front row seat to justice. Don't go anywhere, folks. Fasten your seatbelts. Up next.
In tonight's Tank Takes, a Florida man is accused of stashing his counterfeit cash in a box of Zaxby's wings, which has us wondering, where would our think tank stash their fake cash?
Franklin Ty Tucker is on trial for the murder of Matthew Bonnet at a well-known drug spot called the Treehouse.
He's not a lawyer. He's representing himself in a murder trial. Everything at stake.
Mr. Bonnet was stabbed numerous times. The prosecution tells that story, but the problem is very little of that story is true.
You'll see it all unfold right here on Court TV.
The Treehouse Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
Welcome back. Time for tonight's Tank Takes, where we take a look at the world of crime and justice and some stories that don't fit in the rest of the show, so we gather them all together and serve them to you here at the end. Still with us, our think tank, Judge Gail Byers, Ann Bremner, Michael Sterling. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, let's get to it. First story, I'm calling this one Dad and Gone. A couple not from Florida, okay? I just want to make that clear off the top. They're from Kansas. They've been arrested. The woman's father was living with them, and he passed away. They didn't report him dead. Instead, they sort of stuffed him and hid the dead body in the house for 6 years to collect $200,000 worth of his retirement checks. The body had mummified. They lied to the extended family about where he was all this time, telling no one. They finally got arrested. They finally got caught. Judge Gail Byers, what's the worst part of this story?
That there's no indication they spent the money on air fresheners. I cannot imagine the stench in that house after a dead body being there for 6 years. And these folks were so stupid that there's no indication that they bothered to hide the stench of it.
Unbelievable. Ann Bremner, what do you think is the worst part of this?
Oh, I don't even know where to begin, Vinny. I agree with the judge, but I also just think, to think that they would go get that money and not think about the dead body that they've got there is just, I mean, is it even worth it to have a dead body at your house all that time just to get that amount of money? I don't think so.
Unreal. And the medical examiner said natural causes here. Michael Sterling.
Vinny, the worst part is they stole this storyline from the TV show Shameless, except they didn't follow it to the T, because in Shameless they at least buried the body in the backyard.
That's right. I do remember that. I knew this sounded familiar. Okay.
Right.
Next story, I'm calling this one Indescribably Dumb. A man has been arrested after police found counterfeit cash hidden inside a box of Zaxby's wings. There it is, folks. Unbelievable. They were sort of suspicious of this guy because they smelled a little scent of marijuana in the air. But here's my question, Ann Bremner. Where would you hide your fake money? Zaxby's, Popeyes, or in a box of Chick-fil-A?
That's really tough. I think Chick-fil-A. I mean, I love fried chicken. So we have Bogabach out here in Seattle. I get it like 3 times a week, but I'm going to choose Chick-fil-A.
Well, and Michael Sterling, you know that she's not carrying any counterfeit cash on a Sunday.
Absolutely right, Vinny.
Unbelievable. All right, let's get to our final story tonight. Calling this one Big Mistake. Okay, 4 frat guys from Oklahoma State University. Oklahoma State was playing Texas, the Texas Longhorns, and apparently they came across the carcass, I guess, of an actual Longhorn and dumped it on the lawn of another fraternity, and they got in trouble. Now, here's my question, Ann. If they were playing Stanford, what would have happened here?
Well, Vinny is a fellow Stanford grad. Remember, we just had, what is that? Oh, my God. I want a copy of that.
She's got a dead tree.
That's right.
Judge Gail Byers, what would you, where's your, what's your mascot?
Let me tell you. Oh, mine's a Spartan, Case Western Spartan. So, but I'm telling you, every one of those parents are at that school looking for a refund of their tuition dollars because they can't believe how dumb their kids are.
Michael Sterling, we have about 10 seconds. I'll give you the last word.
If they came across a maroon tiger, because I'm Morehouse and Texas Southern, so they're both tigers, maroon tigers. So if they came across one of those, that would have been incredible.
A little dangerous, too. Great job tonight, Judge Gail Byers, Ann Bremner, Michael Sterling.
Thanks.
Beat Cal. Okay. Finally, folks, before we go tonight, take a look at your screens. We have a missing child. This is Joel Hudson, missing since January 9th out of Lebanon, Indiana, 17 years old. If you see Joel, pick up the phone, make the call, 1-800-THE-LOST, 911, or the Lebanon Police Department in Indiana. Let's see if we can get Joel to a safe place tonight. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night, and as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.